Hey guys, tonight we're going to dig through the dusty cabinets of ancient Roman bathrooms. You'll squeeze between marble walls, hear the splash of cold aqueduct-fed water, and smell the slightly unsettling combination of incense, oil, and vinegar in the air. Someone nearby is stirring a grayish-white paste in a bronze bowl, muttering about teeth that shine like polished bone. You look down, and yes, that paste smells. Interesting. Welcome to the bizarre, often questionable world of Roman toothpaste. And before you reach for your minty tube and whisper thank goodness, just remember, some of these ancient ingredients might include things like burnt animal bones, crushed oyster shells, or brace yourself aged human urine. You probably won't survive this in your morning routine, but it's a fascinating ride. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are. I love seeing how far we travel together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the entrance of a Domusa, a wealthy Roman townhouse on a sleepy street in Pompeii. It's early morning, and the air is crisp with a salty breeze from the nearby coast. Inside, the family is already up. There's bustling in the atrium, clinking of metal, and the low chatter of household slaves preparing hot water and scented oils. You wander through the triclinium, past a fading fresco of Bacchus holding a wine jug, and find yourself in the bathing chamber. This is where it all begins, the Roman hygiene ritual. It's not just a rinse-and-go affair. For elite Romans, personal grooming is a serious display of status and teeth, though rarely shown in a wide smile, are expected to be clean, white, and, ideally, present. You watch as the master of the house reclines on a low bench while an attendant brings him a small bronze container filled with a chalky powder, crushed charcoal, perhaps, or maybe ground bones. A touch of vinegar is poured in, forming a gritty paste. He leans forward and, with a cloth-wrapped finger, smears the paste onto his teeth. There's no brushing in the modern sense. It's more of a polish, a firm rub, a slight wince, a rinse with cold water, and a hopeful grimace. This was considered dental care. The Romans didn't invent toothpaste, but they certainly made it their own, borrowing ideas from the Greeks and adding their own flair and funk. They developed recipes that blended the scientific with the superstitious. The goal? Whiter teeth, fresher breath, and maybe, just maybe, protection against decay. And not that they really understood bacteria. The wealthy could afford exotic ingredients, crushed oyster shells imported from Gaul, powdered deer antlers, resin from Arabian trees. The poor? They used whatever was around, ashes, charcoal, sometimes just a cloth and some vinegar. Everyone, though, believed in the ritual of cleansing the mouth as part of daily preparation for business, socializing, or seduction. Historians still argue whether Romans truly understood oral hygiene in a medical sense or if they were just mimicking the aesthetic views of the elite. One camp says the act was symbolic, like putting on a toga, a costume of health. Another suggests they observed cause and effect. When I scrub with charcoal, my teeth feel better. A third camp just laughs and points out how many skulls from Roman tombs show signs of serious tooth decay. Despite all of this effort. Quirky fact: the philosopher Seneca once wrote that you could judge a man's character by the smell of his breath. Let's just say, if your toothpaste smelled like vinegar and burnt hoof, you might want to carry a sprig of mint, too. As the morning light filters through the skylight above, you begin to appreciate the rhythm of Roman life. Slow, intentional, layered with habits passed down from Greek physicians, street gossip, and a touch of ancient marketing. After all, a glowing smile could win you favor in the forum or at least a second date at the amphitheater. And tomorrow, when someone tells you your toothpaste has whitening crystals, you might wonder if that's just modern oyster shell powder with a prettier name. You continue wandering through the villa. The marble floors cool beneath your feet, the faint scent of olive oil and lavender still lingering from earlier baths. Down a narrow hallway, you hear soft humming. It's another member of the household. At this time a young woman is seated before a bronze mirror, surrounded by small clay pots and carved wooden boxes. This is where you really see how seriously the Romans took their hygiene rituals. For them, Cleanliness was both daily discipline and social necessity. From feet to fingertips to the space between your teeth, there was a product, a tool, or a slave whose job was to help you deal with it. You notice a curious set of items laid out before her. There's a bowl of pumice powder, a glass bottle of vinegar, and a cloth that's been twisted into a sort of scrubber. Her mouth opens slightly as she dabs the cloth into the mixture, and then delicately, methodically begins to rub it across her teeth. Not too hard, not too long, just enough to give that matte white look that Romans associated with a clean, desirable mouth. It wasn't just about removing food. The ritual had spiritual and aesthetic dimensions, too. Roman authors often spoke about purity of the body as reflecting purity of the soul. A clean mouth suggested discipline. A well-kept smile implied you were in control of your appetites. And, for the record, showing too many teeth when you smiled? That was considered a bit uncouth. Roman sculptors carved lips closed for a reason. And yet, behind all this carefully measured restraint, there was a strange passion for dental care, especially among the wealthy. They didn't just clean, they experimented. They shared recipes. They even debated the merits of particular mixtures, like today's arguments about fluoride or charcoal toothpaste. One popular Roman formula included a mix of ashes from burned goat hooves, salt, crushed oyster shells, and a splash of vinegar. The result was an abrasive, chalky paste with a sharp tang, good for whitening, perhaps terrible for enamel, probably. Historians still argue whether the repeated use of these abrasive materials led to faster tooth wear or if the real damage came from dietary. Remember, Romans loved their dried fruits and honeyed wine. Then there were the breath fresheners. Before you panic about the toothpaste, just know they did try to keep their breath pleasant. The young woman you're watching pops a tiny clove into her mouth, yes, the same kind you might use in mulled wine today. Other options included myrrh resin, parsley, and sometimes even frankincense chewed like gum. No Tic Tacs, but not terrible. The elite Romans, particularly women, also dabbled in dental cosmetics. Whitening was in vogue, and it wasn't just about cleanliness. A pale smile was seen as delicate and refined. Some ladies reportedly used powders made from crushed pearls, although whether that was actually effective or just a status flex remains, well, debatable. Here's a quirky tidbit. A few Roman poems refer to women who, embarrassed by missing or darkened teeth, would wear what were essentially early dentures or have their slaves craft thin slivers of ivory to insert temporarily. Think of it as the world's first Insta-smile. You listen to the woman humming as she finishes her routine. She spits into a small bowl, rinses her mouth, and dabs her lips with a cloth perfumed with rose water. Her teeth are clean, at least by the standards of the day, and her breath likely carries notes of cloves and vinegar. It's oddly calming, the way they turned even a potentially unpleasant task into a kind of ritual meditation. Clean, rinse, anoint, smile. There's something familiar about Ida echoes of your own morning routine, minus the goat hoof powder, of course. As she gathers her things, you catch a glimpse of her smile in the mirror. Not a wide grin, but a controlled, graceful lift of the lips. She's ready, not just for the street, but for society, for conversation, for judgment. The Romans may not have had modern dental knowledge, but they absolutely understood the social power of a well-kept face. Whether facing the Senate, the marketplace, or a lover in the garden, your hygiene was part of your message. And your message needed to be polished, sometimes literally. Tomorrow, when you pick up your toothbrush and glance in the mirror, maybe you'll think of this woman with her pumice and vinegar, humming her way to dignity. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be grateful that your toothpaste doesn't taste like foot ashes. You step outside the villa now, feet brushing soft volcanic dust as you make your way through the winding streets of Pompeii. The sun is rising higher, casting golden streaks across stone walls and mosaics. A cart rumbles by, and a vendor calls out his morning specials, mostly olives, dates, and flatbread. But just beyond him, tucked into a stall between a cloth merchant and a perfumer, is a sight that stops you cold. Jars of white powder, bundles of herbs, and a sign that roughly translates to tooth remedies, for a brighter, bolder bite. You linger near the stall, watching an elderly Roman man, his toga impeccably clean, his teeth a broken bar less, so negotiate with the vendor. He points to one of the jars. The vendor nods and proudly opens it, releasing a faint whiff of something earthy. The label, bone ash vinegar paste stay fortified. You probably wouldn't survive brushing your teeth with it, but the Romans, oh, they swore by it. Let's break this one down. Bone ash was exactly what it sounds like, the remains of burnt animal bones, usually cattle or sheep. The idea was that the calcium content would help strengthen your teeth and scrub away stains. Sounds scientific. Broken bar if you squint hard enough. It was often mixed with crushed oyster shells or egg shells, so both rich in minerals, but also wildly abrasive. And then came the vinegar, strong, sharp, acidic. Romans believed it had cleansing properties, possibly because of its astringent feel. In reality, it likely eroded enamel. But who's counting? Here's the real kicker. One of the more infamous ingredients in Roman dental pasta, at least among historians with a dark sense of humor, was powdered mouse skull. Yes, that's right, tiny skulls, dried and ground, supposedly enhanced whitening power and protected against toothaches. Why? Well, according to folk medicine, mice were thought to carry some kind of resiliency, perhaps because they could gnaw through anything. If they could destroy walls, maybe they could strengthen your bite. Logic. But the absolute showstopper of Roman toothpaste recipes? Human urine. Now, don't look away just yet. Let's be gentle. Aged urine, preferably Portuguese, because it had the right strength, was prized for its ammonia content. Ammonia, even today, is a powerful cleanser, and it does have some whitening capability. Romans would let urine sit in sealed jars until it fermented. Then, they'd mix it into pastes or use it straight as a rinse. Pliny the Elder, in all his wisdom, recommended it for tooth whitening and strengthening. You take a step back from the stall, suddenly very grateful for your mint-flavored gel back home. Quirky fact, there was a time in Rome when public urinals were taxed. Vespasian, the emperor, decided to make money off of the city's need to, well, go. Collectors would gather the liquid and sell it to tanneries and, yes, dental suppliers. It became such a common practice that when Vespasian's son Titus mocked the tax, the emperor supposedly held up a coin and said, "Does it smell?" When Titus said no, Vespasian replied, "Yet it comes from urine." Historians still argue whether Romans actually used the urine-based concoctions daily or whether they were reserved for specific ailments or elite rituals. Some believe it was more folk remedy than mainstream practice, while others suggest the smell became a symbol of toughness, like drinking apple cider vinegar today. Standing here, among jars of chalky powder and fermenting bottles, it's clear that Roman dental care was equal parts science, tradition, and sheer boldness. You wonder who was the first person to look at a mouse skull, a heap of ashes, and a jug of urine and think, yes, my smile needs this. And you ate a broken bar. You have to admire the dedication. Back in the stall, the vendor wraps up a small purchase for the elderly customer, just a pinch of ground bone with a sprig of mint. They exchange pleasantries, and the man smiles faintly, exposing a row of teeth stained from wine but worn smooth from years of scrubbing. He may not have minty freshness, but he has pride. And in ancient Rome, that counted for a lot. Tomorrow, when you squint at your toothpaste label and feel overwhelmed by the ingredients, take heart. At least it doesn't say mouse-derived. You follow that elderly Roman man through a side alley now, the sun beginning to warm the stone streets beneath your sandals. He hums softly, carrying his tiny packet of dental powder with care as if it were gold dust. But instead of returning home, he stops at a small square with a curious arrangement, a handful of ceramic pots, each placed beside a grated drain. A boy is sitting nearby with a tired expression and a long stick, poking at one of the jars. This, my friend, is not a peculiar art installation. This is the urine collection site, a key part of the urine economy that kept Roman mouths and leather in shape. Public urinals, known as phalonici or sometimes just urine pots, were placed strategically around cities like Rome and Pompeii. Citizens and men, primarily were encouraged to relieve themselves into these jars, and then came the collectors. They'd scoop, pour, and transport the stuff to where it was needed: leather tanners, laundries, and yes, dental specialists. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Ammonia-rich aged urine was used in all sorts of Roman industries. In fact, Emperor Vespasian, remember him from our earlier coin story? Famously imposed a urine tax, vectigal urine, around 70s. The collectors who profited from selling this pungent gold were now legally obligated to share a cut with the empire. You watch as the boy empties one of the pots into a clay amphora and sloshes it around carefully, avoiding splashes. He then seals the top with a wax cloth and marks it with a tag. Maybe it'll be sent to a full-on kit to help bleach tunics. Or maybe it's headed to a wealthy damas to become the base of tomorrow's tooth tonic. Who knows? Quirky detail: the best urine was said to come from Iberia, modern-day Portugal and Spain. Roman writers like Catullus joked about the Spanish sparkle in someone's teeth, not knowing it, or maybe knowing all too well that it came from imported pee. It had a reputation for strength, possibly due to climate or diet. Either way, if you were rich and vain enough, you imported foreign urine to gargle with. Now that's commitment. Historians still argue whether this entire system was widespread or a peculiar luxury of the elite. Some claim most citizens wouldn't have gone near the stuff, relying instead on herbal brews or salt scrubs. Others believe the use of urine was far more normalized. After all, necessity trumps niceties when it comes to hygiene. You stroll past the square now, leaving behind the sharp tang in the air, and wander into a bustling market street. On a wall, you notice a bit of graffiti scrawled in charcoal: "Marcia's breath is as sour as vinegar and as sharp as Iberian pea." Roman romance poetry was brutal, but it makes you think that there was a strange pride in these strange habits. The use of such extreme ingredients wasn't just about cleanliness, it was about virtus, a Roman sense of toughness, discipline, and boldness. If you could handle bathing in cold water, marching in sandals, and cleaning your teeth with vinegar and bone ash, well, a broken bar, you were probably made of sterner stuff than your average barbarian. As you duck into the shade of a colonnade, a woman nearby is bargaining with a seller over a jar labeled Dentifricium Ibericum. It's expensive, but it claims to restore the shine of youth, the clarity of speech, and even reduce the sting of sour wine. You can't help but smirk. Tomorrow, when your toothpaste ad claims to refresh and restore, you'll know deep down if they're just rebranding the same dream the Romans had, minus the pots. Hopefully. You leave the marketplace behind now, weaving through quieter lanes where the clatter of hooves fades and the murmur of everyday life takes over. You pass a few children chasing a ball cart from leather and straw, a woman airing out linens, and finally, an elderly man sitting on a stool under an olive tree, his fingers stained with crushed herbs. He looks up at you, smiles a gap-toothed grin, and lifts a curious tool from his lap. It's not a toothbrush, or not as you know it. No nylon bristles, no plastic handles. What he's holding is a chew stick, a small twig, frayed at one end, soft enough to scrub but sturdy enough to survive repeated use. Romans, lacking toothbrushes, made do with what nature provided. Chew sticks came from trees like mastic or licorice, both of which had antiseptic qualities. Sometimes, they were chewed to a pulp and rubbed across the teeth. Sometimes, they were dipped in pastes or oils before the scrubbing began. You watch as he methodically rubs the frayed end along his teeth, moving in small circles. No foaming lather, no buzzing electric hum, just the quiet scrape of twig on enamel. Some Romans used linen cloth wrapped around the finger, a kind of DIY dental mitt. Others preferred small metal tools, like bronze spatulas, to apply their pastes. A few wealthier folks even owned finely carved ivory implements with bristled ends made from animal hair, but those were rare luxuries more likely found in the chambers of elite patricians or imported from the East. Quirky detail: there's evidence that some Romans used feathers as interdental tools, plucked from geese or roosters and flattened at the tip. Imagine that. A goose feather between your molars. Now there's a bedtime visual. Historians still argue whether these tools were effective or merely symbolic. Were they part of a genuine effort to maintain health, or more of a performative act, like scented oils and decorative combs? Skeptics point out that Roman skulls often show heavy wear and decay. Optimists argue that those tools were better than nothing and perhaps more widely used than we think, especially among the urban population. Back under the tree, the man dips his twig into a small dish of powder. You catch the scent of salt, maybe mint, and something earthy. He hums a slow tune as he finishes up, wipes his lips, and tucks the stick behind his ear like a carpenter might his pencil. He looks proud, refreshed even. There's no mirror in sight, but that doesn't seem to matter. Dental hygiene in Rome was as much about habit as it was about result. You didn't need perfect teeth, you just needed discipline, and maybe the confidence to smile without worrying too much about the details. After all, Romans rarely showed their teeth fully in public. Wide grins were seen as coarse or childish. A subtle smirk, a closed lip chuckle, that was Roman charm. And yet, tools still mattered. You imagine a young Roman boy receiving his first chew stick from his father, told to use it daily with vinegar or honey water. A rite of passage, like learning to tie a sandal or address a senator. It was part of growing up, part of being civilized. You pause near a fountain, letting the cool mist brush your face. Nearby, a group of women are gossiping, a one holding a pouch of tooth powder tied with a string. They giggle, leaning close, sniffing each other's breath. A game, a test, a tradition? It makes you wonder how much of our modern obsession with dental perfection stems from roots laid down here, in alleyways of dusty stone and the rustle of linen togas. Clean teeth, fresh breath, it's nothing new. The only difference is a broken bar. We've swapped feathers for floss. You follow the sound of laughter now, light and musical, floating from an upper balcony shaded by trailing vines. A group of Roman women lounges on cushions, sipping diluted wine, fingers adorned with rings and small mirrors in hand. One is holding court, animatedly describing her latest trip to a Greek apothecary and the miraculous ivory powder she swears made her teeth glow like the moonlight on marble. You linger quietly, letting their words wash over you like the rippling surface of a thermal bath. The topic today, tooth fashion, is specifically, whether the Greco-Roman ivory look is still in, or whether the more earthy ochre-toned smile now favored by some Etruscan nobles is the mark of authenticity. Dental aesthetics, it seems, weren't just about hygiene, they were fashion statements. The Greek influence loomed large in Roman life, medicine, philosophy, architecture, and yes, even dental care had Greek fingerprints all over them. Many Roman physicians were actually Greek slaves or freedmen, bringing with them theories from Hippocrates and Galen. When it came to teeth, the Greeks had been writing about oral care for centuries. Their recipes were milder, more herbal, less let's put ammonia in your mouth and more try mint and sage with salt. Some Roman elites adopted these gentler Greek formulations not only for their purported benefits but for their prestige. To say your tooth powder came from Athens was like bragging that your skincare was from Paris. Elite, expensive, and assumed to be effective. But not everyone bought in. You overhear one woman dismissing Greek pastes as too soft, claiming she preferred the Roman mixture of ground shell and resin. Better bite, she says with a wink, and no one accuses you of being a philosopher. There's laughter at that, though one younger woman, clearly a recent addition to the circle, looks uncertain. She asks if it's true some women wore false teeth made of ivory. The group hushes slightly. A few women nod, others roll their eyes. The leader finally leans in and whispers, "Only if you want to marry a senator," before he notices the gaps. Quirky fact, ivory dental implants weren't entirely uncommon, though they weren't exactly functional either. Sometimes they were decorative, slipped in temporarily for public appearances or dinners. Historians have found ancient Roman burial sites with remains that show signs of such cosmetic dental efforts, though they often weren't anchored and were more for show than chewing. Historians still argue whether cosmetic dentistry was widespread or limited to the wealthiest elite. Some believe it was quietly practiced across classes, with local artisans crafting custom inserts. Others think it was a rare indulgence, mentioned in poems and gossip more than actually seen in mouths. Back on the balcony, the conversation shifts to men's teeth. Apparently, a certain Marcus was seen at the bathhouse with breath like a sewer and teeth the color of spoiled garum. The group groans in exaggerated horror. One woman whispers, "If you won't clean your teeth, at least chew some parsley before reciting poetry." You smile to yourself. Even 2,000 years ago, people had deal breakers. A servant arrives with a tray of treats, honeyed almonds, candied dates, and spiced wine. The ladies take dainty bites, dabbing at their lips with linen cloths. You imagine the sugar settling into their teeth, the sticky dates clinging to molars, and tomorrow's tooth powder already calling their names. As you step away from the balcony and down the street once more, it becomes clear that Roman dental culture was never just about health, it was about identity. The Greeks offered one vision, a philosophical, refined, moderate. The Romans, bolder, brasher, and definitely not afraid of a little vinegar. And tomorrow, when someone offers you Greek-style natural toothpaste, maybe ask if it includes the drama too. The air grows warmer now as you follow the sound of iron striking stone, a sharp, rhythmic, with an almost musical echo. You turn a corner and find yourself face to face with a small wooden stall, its awning fluttering in the breeze. Inside sits a street dentist, sleeves rolled, face wrinkled from years of squinting into mouths and probably dodging flailing arms. His tools are spread neatly on a cloth: pliers, bone scrapers, wire loops, and a pot of dark, gloppy resin that smells faintly of pine and a broken bar pane. A young man stands nearby, pale and nervous, clutching his jaw. He opens his mouth reluctantly as the dentist leans in, holding a bronze implement that looks more like a torture device than a dental tool. You watch, wincing in sympathy. Dental care in ancient Rome, especially outside the luxury of a private physician, was run literally and figuratively. There was no anesthetic, no Novocaine. If a tooth hurt badly enough, it was pulled. If it wiggled, it was tied with a horsehair string and yanked with one swift motion. The crowd that sometimes gathered during these impromptu operations didn't help much either, as some cheered, others gagged, one or two fainted. Quirky detail: street dentists were often entertainers too. In markets, they'd shout claims of miracle cures, sometimes even performing minor extractions in public just to draw a crowd and sell more of their powders. Some wore colorful robes, a few had trained monkeys. If that doesn't say "trust me with your molars," I don't know what does. The man in the chair groans now, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. The dentist mutters something about a bad root and gestures for a second pair of hands. Two burly assistants hold the man down. With a sharp jerk, the tooth comes free. Blood drips into a clay bowl. The young man wobbles to his feet, panting, relieved. The dentist, smiling like he just performed a miracle, which, in a way, he did. You might be tempted to recoil, but here's the thing. This was their healthcare. Primitive, yes, but it got the job done. For those who couldn't afford the advice of Galenic physicians or imported ointments from Alexandria, the market dentist was it. He didn't need a degree. He needed courage, a steady hand, and maybe a good grip. Historians still argue whether these tooth pullers had formal training or were just enthusiastic amateurs. Some records suggest local guilds existed, others imply these men simply passed down their craft from father to son or picked it up through trial, error, and a pile of extracted teeth. Pain aside, some Romans also believed that drilling a hole through an aching tooth and stuffing it with herbs could relieve pressure. Think of it as an earlier and horrifying form of root canal therapy. Not always successful, not always survivable. And yet, people came, just like they do today. Because when your tooth hurts, when it pulses like a drum behind your eyes, you don't care about science, you care about relief. The street dentist tosses the bloody tooth into a bucket and dabs the man's gum with a cloth soaked in wine, a kind of sterilization, or at least a numbing prayer. The patient stumbles off, lighter by one tooth, heavier by a story. You glance again at the tool, simple, terrifying, essential. No LED lights, no reclining chairs, just iron, willpower, and a little public spectacle. And tomorrow, when you sit in a clean, air-conditioned clinic and hear the soft buzz of a hygienist's polisher, you may close your eyes and whisper, "At least it's not the forum." As the shouts and clamor of the marketplace fade behind you, a gentler aroma wafts through the warm air, something herbal, something a broken bar minty. You follow your nose into a shaded arcade, where vendors are hawking perfumes, oils, and medicinal herbs. And tucked in among them is a small booth covered in sprigs of greenery and tiny pots labeled with names like mentha, myrrha, and salvia. This is the Roman answer to modern-day mouthwash, remedies for bad breath. Breath was a big deal in Rome. Public speaking was a daily ritual for many, from senators to sellers to street poets. And nothing could sink a conversation faster than the breath of someone who just downed garum and forgot their parsley rinse. So the Romans developed an arsenal of tactics to keep their mouths not just clean, but pleasant or at least tolerable. You pause near the booth, watching as a young woman purchases a bundle of mint and a small clay pot filled with thick, greenish paste. The vendor recommends she chew the mint daily and rub the paste on her gums before temple visits. Your words, he says with a wink, should never carry more vinegar than your salad. One of the oldest breath fresheners, parsley, chewed after meals. It masked odors and supposedly soothed the stomach. Other popular choices included cinnamon, myrrh, and even frankincense, the latter often chewed like gum. It wasn't rare to see a Roman noble with a cheek full of resin, slowly releasing its perfume during a long conversation.